Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me today. It is January 2nd as I do this live stream. And if you're watching this recording later, it's January 2nd when I'm doing this. And the new year, coming into the new year, we do what everybody does. We reflect on the past year. We think about what we're going to be doing for the new year, what we're going to change, how we're going to move forward. And we do that by looking to the past. We look to the last year. And that made me realize that when it comes to skincare and the condition of your skin, your history has a lot to do with what's going on today. So that's going to be the topic that we discuss. For those of you who have not joined me before, I'm Jim Harrison. Been doing and working with essential oils for about 30 years. And I've done everything. When it comes to essential oils, I've just done it all. Everything except for distillation. But, I've been an educator, global educator, and I've been a formulator, and also designed the certificate program for Bastyr University School of Natural Medicine, which gave me a really interesting perspective on how to teach essential oils and even how to work with them, what they are and how they do what they do. So that's what we're going to be getting into today is skin and essential oils. So let me go ahead and let me just tell you here, check me out if you want to get in contact with me. This is one of my email addresses. They all end in jimharrison.com. So if you're looking for me, this is the way to do it. If you're on LinkedIn, please share, please like. Love to hear your comments. And on YouTube, you got to subscribe and, all the, push buttons, right? Subscribe, push, you know how it works, right? And, but that's all the promotion I'll do until the end. Okay. We'll get back to all that kind of stuff. Just want to kind of get back to getting my stuff ready so that we can do a really nice, clean presentation today. Here we go. This is what we're going to be talking about is skin remembers. And we're going to be talking about neuroscience, specifically neurocosmetics, how to use skincare for balancing the nervous function of the body. We're going to be talking about stress, but a little more than stress. We're going to be talking about memory is what we'll be talking about along with the stress, and essential oil repair. This will be the topics that we cover today. And a little more, I'll give you as much as I possibly can when it comes to information that relates to what we're doing here. So what am I saying here? I'm saying the skin remembers. Well, it's the storage of your history, skin, right? You see in people's faces their history. This is something that, we say often. People write their story on their face. And when it comes to skin, the skin actually displays a lot of your internal workings, not only physically, but mentally, your thought process, how you think appears on your skin. Kind of interesting way of looking at it. So here we have, looking at the storage of your skin, just want to put this out there that our skin holds the story of our life, right? And I'm not just talking yesterday, last year, as I said, it's the beginning of the year. I'm not just saying what happened last year. This is a story of your life. And it stores emotional, neurological, and chemical memories. And not only does it store it, but it shows it, right? Skin shows you what's going on in your internal world. And healing the skin, in order to heal some of the conditions of the skin, you have to understand a person's history. So I'm going to talk about that today. That's our topic. This is where we're going. Now, when it comes to where we're going to go with this topic, we're looking at the neuroimmunocutaneous endocrine network, the NICE network. This is the connection between the nervous system and the immune system and the skin and the hormones. And it's the connection, the brain, the skin, the hormones, immune system, right? And trauma activates this network through the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is called the HPA axis, and peripheral sensory neurons. This is the relationship between who we are internally and what we're looking at when it comes to the skin. So triggers long-term skin balance patterns. I'm trying to read that, right? Generally what I do is I just spout out my words, but I'm trying to read my bullets here. So this is a very simplistic example, right? Examples which would be stress worsens eczema via or by way of neuropeptides. So we have a signaling system within our body. Stress, trauma, joy, love. You know, I should focus a little bit on the positive, because the positive emotions, the positive events in our life also trigger positivity in our physical structure, which is going to show up on the skin as healthy, vibrant, vital skin. So good things happening, good things for the skin. When it's a negative, when it's trauma, when there's injury, these are things that can affect the skin long term, and they may have been forgotten by the person who actually has gone through these situations. So as a therapist, so I'm generally talking to therapists. If you're a therapist, I'm talking to you right now. And as a therapist, if you're treating the skin, it's really good to know this person's history so that you can determine what some of these neurological responses are within the system that are triggering surface issues on the skin. I mean, eczema is always an easy one. You know, we know that, you know, somebody that has eczema, when they're stressed out, it does seem to increase. It's, you know, becomes more inflamed, skin becomes more broken. And so stress, yes, directly will influence conditions like eczema, but it also addresses or will create conditions in the skin like the lipid barrier not functioning properly, like the immune function of the skin not functioning, hydration. A lot of different things can happen within the skin due to the trauma, the stress, and the internal workings of the person wearing that skin. Now, here's trauma in the skin. Here, let's take a look at this. Or let me bring it up closer for you. I'm pressing buttons here, but it's not moving. Thank you. Okay, so past trauma creates long-term overreactions like tingling, itching, blushing. A lot more could be on that list. Stress is also linked to flares. We already mentioned eczema, but also flare-ups of rosacea. Now, here's an important thing. Olfactory memory may re-trigger somatic responses. Somatic meaning, you know, physical or body. And so when we're talking about trauma in the skin, what we're talking about is, well, we're talking about trauma. We're talking about a lot of it is emotional, and some of it can be physical. We're going to talk also about physical traumas, injuries, and things that happen to the body and how they can trigger responses in the skin. The olfactory memory is a very important thing here, especially when we're dealing with certain fragrances, because scent, as I talk about often, there is a memory, emotion, scent bond. And the line that I will often repeat is that every memory, every emotion has a scent attachment. This is why when you walk into a room and you catch that scent, it can immediately trigger a memory. Sometimes so vivid, it's like, you know, a little streaming video going off in your head, right? So memory and the olfactory memory is really important to understand in all of this, because very importantly, it can be used as part of the therapy, which we're going to talk about when we get to the end. I'm going to talk about some of the practices, some of the habits, some of the rituals you can create around applying skincare that also helps to create balance in the internal world of who you are. Love pressing buttons and the wrong one, something pops up and you get something else, right? Just go for the ride with me here, okay? Here we are looking at physical injury and chronic skin changes. So injury sensitizes sensory nerves, and when the sensory nerves are affected, yes, the skin is also going to be affected. I mean, that's kind of logical. During injury, inflammatory cytokines can be elevated, and following the injury, they can remain elevated. So these are all conditions that we have to understand. And when it comes to injury, generally, well, I can't even speak generally because everyone is a little bit different. You know, depending on the injury, depending on the emotional impact of the injury. You know, you have to include the emotional impact as well as the physical impact, which is also going to affect the neurotransmitter release, the neuropeptides that are being released, and things like cytokines that are being released. And the stronger the emotional memory of the injury, the more likely those cytokines will remain elevated. Now, these things can result in hyperreactive or dry, depleted skin. There's many ways that this can affect the skin. You know, sensitivity and inflammation. All of these things can be due to a physical injury and the chronic skin change. And again, what we're talking about here is how to evaluate a skin condition and try and relate it to physical injury or stored emotional trauma. This is one of the things that we also have to pay attention to is the environment. I'm going to bring up my outside, inside out method of evaluation. And, you know, these slides that I'm showing you right now are all a part of that, right? You need to understand how this works. So the environment that you live in is going to affect your skin. And this can be yesterday, today, tomorrow, but it can also be several years ago. We're often told this, that, when it comes to hyperpigmentation in the skin, a good amount of that has to do with sunburns. This poor kid, look at him. It's sunburns that we had when we were 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. So this is a good example of history and the effect that it has on your skin. And these things develop over time. So we have to understand that as well. And so getting back to the trauma or looking at the pollution, the toxins, sunburn, these things appear to not being long-term effective. So, you get a sunburn, you put on all the lotions and you get rid of it, and then it's gone, and then you're fine and you're healed, and life goes on. We don't understand that there's going to be an accumulation of responses that continue in the body that, again, won't show up for 10, 15, 20 years. Now, with certain pollution and certain toxins, well, this is the obvious thing in why we want to have a clean environment. And what we hear about these areas where, people tend to have higher rates of cancer, and they find that it's due to the toxins and the pollution that is in that environment. Now, a lot of times what that cause would be, the direct cause being the pollution, the chemical, toxicity in the atmosphere, the cancer may not show up again 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So there's an accumulation of what happens in our youth and as we grow and as we develop and what shows up in our skin. So we very much want to understand a person's history. Where did they grow up? What was the environment like? And understanding that, you can kind of build a map to what the skin is looking like now. If there seems to be premature aging, which instead of calling it premature aging, I can just call it, damage to the skin. The hyperpigmentation being one of those things, but, we're looking at wrinkles, and we're looking at, dry or dehydrated skin, or we're looking at a compromised lipid barrier. These can be things that accumulated over years and were due to toxicity in the environment as the person was growing up. And so, we got to look at air quality, we have to look at the UV exposure, and we have to look at chemical exposure and how that impacts the skin. What the causes are, a lot of it is oxidative stress. So we know UV rays, the sun causes oxidative stress. That's how a lot of the damage that's caused to the skin is happening due to free radical damage, oxidative stress. Pollution, chemical toxins. These can all cause free radicals or oxidative stress, which can accumulate over the years, damaging cells. And how that appears in the skin can vary from individual to individual. So there's not one map, there's not one trail that you can follow and go, well, here's the skin condition, and we know that that's oxidative stress, and it goes back to UV or toxins or whatever. We're in a way trying to be, Sherlock Holmes here and trying to figure out what's going on in the skin. Not always the easiest thing, and I'm going to give you some ideas on how to work around what you don't know. For me, working with essential oils, the world of I don't know is very important because there's so much information in aromatherapy that is not quite accurate. It's not the whole story. And sometimes that information becomes fact. And facts are flexible when it comes to aromatherapy. How essential oils work, what they do, become very individualized with the person. And so when we're trying to track what's going on in the skin and look at the history of the person, we need to understand that there's going to be a lot of I don't know going on. And when we recognize what we don't know, we are able to work with I don't know. And that's what I mean about, when I'm talking about essential oils and, I don't know when it comes to certain things in essential oils. But because these certain facts are things that I do not know, I'm able to work them into my therapy by acknowledging there are missing pieces. And the complexity and beauty of essential oils allows us to create fill-ins for missing pieces. Are they always the right thing? I don't know. Do they work? A lot of times they do. And this is where your knowledge of essential oils comes in. The more you know and the more you understand about essential oils, the more you're able to work with the I don't knows. And when it comes to a historic I don't know, then you can figure out how to fit your essential oils in. But anyway, these are some of the physical, environmental things that happen with the body that we need to look at. Also, the gut. We talk about this a lot, and I'm going to get to what I was just calling, or a minute ago called, my outside inside out method. And in the beauty industry, the term that is generally used is beauty inside out, which is what I'm talking about as well. But the reason I put an outside before the inside, before the out, is because we have to acknowledge what is going on in a person's environment in order to understand. So diet is one of those things that we look at. Generally, we think, well, what you put inside your body is going to show up outside. That's beauty inside out. But we also have to look at the quality of what we're eating. Where is it coming from? What environment was it grown in? How far did it travel to get to the store that you bought it from? There are a lot of things about food that we need to understand in order to understand how it's affecting, your whole body health, but also affecting your skin. Now, the gut microbiome is very, very important. It's getting a lot more attention, which it necessarily does and should be getting a lot more attention, understanding your microbiome. And so this is an important thing. And unless you're a functional medicine therapist and are doing all the testing, it's difficult to analyze a person's microbiome. You can get some of that information just from asking certain questions about a person's diet. Is their diet inflammatory? Is their diet high in sugar? Is their diet, compromising the microbiome, or is their diet enhancing their microbiome? So these things you can know and have a fair idea. Unless you're a nutritionist, it's out of your scope of practice to recommend foods, to recommend certain things. But this is the direction you want to point your guests into. Your clients need to understand that what happens in their gut is really important, because what happens in their gut is happening on their skin. And your work as a therapist is only going to be as good as the internal environment of that person you're working with. So, gut microbiome, so important. Inflammatory foods. Well, of course, we all know that there are foods, fast foods are one of the best examples. Processed foods, another one of the best examples. My recommendation, don't eat fast food and don't eat processed food if you want to have good skin. But that's kind of what I say. I'm sticking to it as well. But yeah, these are inflammatory foods. They can cause oxidative stress, as I was talking about, like the environment. They can also compromise healthy microbiome. These processed foods and fast foods cause inflammation. They are also nutritionally deficient, and nutrition, vitamins, minerals, polyphenols, and like so many other compounds that are in really healthy food are necessary for healthy skin. So the diet, what's going on with the gut story? You need to know that. Don't eat fast food. Don't eat processed food. Skin remembers. This is the topic of what we're doing. So, as I said, the environment, the skin is going to store that information and it's going to regenerate based on the information that's stored. So this is, why can't the skin just heal? You've had trauma, you've had injuries, you've been in a bad environment. The skin, or the cells in general, can continue to regenerate more damage. So damaged cells can create damaged cells. So you're always trying to feed the right story to stimulate healthy cell regeneration. Now, what's happening in the skin and how it reflects, I'm kind of doing a review of what I was just talking about. So the long-term shifts in cortisol and neuropeptides, this can come from trauma, it can come from injury, it can come from your thought process. Now, your thought process is another thing I guess I need to state, is that I'm talking a lot about psychotherapy here. I'm not a psychotherapist, so I cannot diagnose from psychological perspective. I can't recommend anything from psychology. But that doesn't mean I can't work from that area. That doesn't mean I can't understand it, because my work is very specific. I work with plant-based skincare ingredients, and I work with essential oils. I know how to use those tools. I know how to use them when the I don't know show up. I'm not a psychotherapist. I'm not going to evaluate any of my guests or clients from a psychotherapy perspective. Sort of I am, but it's based on what I need to know to pick the right essential oils and the right plant-based ingredients. And so it's a very fine line that we're treading here, okay? So I am talking a little bit from, psychotherapy. I'm even talking medical, and I'm not a doctor. So again, I can't diagnose and I can't prescribe, but I can use essential oils to help the skin based on the things that I'm talking about. The more knowledge you have, the more precise you can get with your essential oils, okay? So when we're talking about the skin remembering and reflecting, we are talking about things that have a very specific category for licensing. So whatever you're licensing as a therapist, use it, and use it in the way that you're licensed to use. You can do this, right? I mean, things that I'm talking about, you can do no matter who you are, and what your licensing and what your background is. Again, it's about essential oils, plant-based ingredients, and That's the knowledge that I'm explaining you really need to have in order to do the work that I'm talking about here. So changes in barrier function and inflammation is another thing that happens when you have injury and all that history. And the skin behavior becomes default unless we change the signal. So there is a signal that happens from trauma, from injury. These things, when we say trauma, the word trauma has high impact emotionally and physically. And trauma affects the body in so many different ways. And unless we get to the source, it's hard to treat for final, ongoing, sustainable results in what we're talking about here in skincare. And so the default is there. Unless we change it, it's going to maintain. And this is where the difference between a superficial treatment and a more holistic, in-depth treatment, working with essential oils. Keep in mind, essential oils are incredibly holistic. So now what we want to do is we want to create new signals. We want to create new skin behavior, unless the signals have been positive. Our history is so important to who we are today. And we know people who have experienced a lot of trauma, maybe abuse, and other undesirable things as children and growing up. And that information is stored. It's stored in their emotions, it's stored in their memory, it's stored in their whole body, including their skin. So the signaling is there. What we're trying to do in understanding a person's history and using essential oils to shift and change that history is we're looking to create new behaviors, new signaling, new ideas. Are we creating new emotions? I don't know. There's only so many emotions. I guess we can't create new ones, can we? But we're trying to stimulate the positive and decrease the overall effects of the negative. So essential oils definitely, no doubt about it, will provide new input. Some of the ways that we describe essential oils is they carry information. And yes, we can say it that way, but what essential oils really are, it's a complex mixture of compounds. These chemical compounds, they all have a way of triggering certain reactions and activity, including neurotransmitters, neuropeptides. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. And so this is new information that the essential oils are providing. Now, the other thing is they're going to work through olfaction and the skin. This is the beauty of essential oils in working with skincare, is that what we're talking about is very, very holistic. I keep saying it that, I just will live by this, that I do feel that essential oils are the most holistic tool we could possibly be using in not only skincare, but in overall health. And it's because they have profound physical properties where they can change functions in the body. They can trigger positive response. They can heal. There's a lot they can do. I'm going to, again, talk about that in a couple of minutes here. Now, physically, that's what I just talked about. But there's an olfactory response. Now, the olfactory response is also a physical response. If you've heard me talk about my other system, the holistic essential oil triad, the triad is olfactory, pharmacology, metaphysical. These three categories that are synergistic. They're happening at the same time every time you use an essential oil. So when I say there's an olfactory response through essential oils, we're talking about limbic system response. Limbic system will trigger certain neurotransmitters, which becomes a physical response through olfactory. But there's also the emotions. Like I said, every memory, every emotion has a scent attachment. Well, the way scent works is it works through those emotional and memory centers, because it's a protective mechanism. check out one of my talks on the olfactory system. You can understand that in a little bit more depth. But it's something that matters. This emotional memory triggering is something that matters. And when we understand that, and we know what the olfactory emotional memory responses are to certain essential oils, which we can also direct through intention, we have a tool that, from a physical level, working on the skincare, can physically repair a lot of damage and provide the skin the health that it is looking for. And at the same time, we can change the emotional functions in the person. We can change some of the memories. We can work from that emotion, memory, and physical all synergistically together, all through one application of skincare. It's going to come up when I talk about rituals and application. Now, with the essential oils, you're treating both the cause and the visible condition. That's a really important feature here. Now, here's a dual pathway, skin and scent, which is what we were just talking about. Okay, so now I'm just going to show that this is what's going on. Whenever you use skincare, no matter what's in it, every skincare has a scent. If you have a skincare that has no fragrance to it, it's generally because they're putting these perfume compounds into the formula, and it neutralizes odors, so you do not, how do I say this? I want to say you do not detect an odor, but you are. But just the way that detection is, it doesn't have a detectable scent. And that's generally done with the same perfume compounds that a lot of people will complain about. But because of these perfume chemists being so good at what they do, it neutralizes odors. Well, what are they neutralizing? The ingredients in your skincare should have an odor. It should have some odor to it. You have surfactants, and you have fatty acids, and you have all of these other ingredients in your skincare, and they all have an odor. So a fragrance-free product would be something that doesn't have any kind of perfume or essential oils in it, but it will still have an odor. It'll have a detectable odor. I don't know why I went into that little deal there, but I felt it needed to be said. So anyway, when you put something on topically, you're supporting the physiology and barrier function of the skin. This is our treatments, right? If you're an esthetician and you're working in the skin, you're looking at the skin, you're looking at the surface, and your main goal is that skin will look really good, really healthy. It'll appear that it has no issues after your treatment. This is the goal. You want the skin, topically on the surface to look really vital and really healthy. But there's always more to it, right? Now, the olfactory system is happening at the same time. You put your skincare on. This is why I went into that little deal about fragrance-free. And there's going to be a fragrance identity. And that fragrance identity also is going to trigger neurotransmitters through the limbic system. It's going to trigger certain neurotransmitters through the body. And then you also have memory and emotion, which we can use as part of your therapy. Okay, I'll talk a little bit more about that coming up. I keep saying that, right? I have all these things I'm going to tell you about coming up. Well, I do, and I will, and I'm going to. As I talked about with the olfactory system, you're looking at triggering neurotransmitters, and you're also working through memory and emotion, but you're also triggering an immune response. And now in the nervous system, their central nervous system, autonomic nervous system, one of the more beneficial ways that essential oils especially affect the body is through the autonomic functions. Because when you're in fight or flight, sympathetic mode, that hypersympathetic mode, you're releasing cortisol, and the heart's going up, and your breathing is, and that's not good for your skin. And so when you have something like an essential oil that can trigger parasympathetic function, rest and digest mode is another way that's phrased, it slows down the heart, slows down the breath. It helps digestion. So it allows the body to function more smoothly, which of course is going to be good for your skin. When I was talking about some of the physical properties of essential oils, especially, I'm talking a lot about the receptors. Our body communicates through receptors on your skin. And, when we think about, receptors, generally we think about olfactory receptors. When you smell something, it's a molecule binding with an olfactory receptor, which is triggering information that goes to the olfactory bulb and in the limbic system. That's the trail of your sense of smell. Now, on your skin, you also have receptors, and actually through your whole body. This is the communication. This is how neuropeptides work, hormones. This is how everything functions almost in the body, is it communicates by binding with receptors, triggering a response in the cell through that receptor, which triggers a physical response throughout the body. Now, the receptors that are very key when we talk about plant-based ingredients and especially essential oils, and I'm talking about receptors right here at the surface level. I'll show you a chart in a second here. Like TRPV1, that's the receptor that irritation, inflammation. So when you put oregano or cinnamon directly on your skin and it irritates, it's because it's binding with the TRPV1 receptor and triggering that irritating response and also producing inflammation through that. The endocannabinoid system, which became very, very familiar or popular through the work with cannabis, mainly, CBDs and things like that. And so we started learning more and more and more about the endocannabinoid system, which is also all through our body, but also on the surface of the skin. So, CBD, it responds by binding with CBD1 or CB1 and CB2. There's a compound in the oil called copaiba, which is the compound is beta-caryophyllene, and that compound binds with CB2, which reduces inflammation. So as a topical ingredient, that essential oil with the caryophyllene is going to reduce inflammation, doing it by way of the endocannabinoid system, or more specifically CB2 receptor. OR2AT4, it was a mouthful. That's an olfactory receptor. We have olfactory receptors throughout our skin. Some of the responses that we have, and there's compounds in rose that actually do this, and also patchouli, that bind with that OR2AT4 receptor, and it triggers wound healing or cellular regeneration and also barrier repair. So when you're using an essential oil topically, you actually are communicating through the surface of the skin. And this was a discussion that I had. I did another webinar, and it was based on receptors. And when I was asked to do this webinar, it was actually, the focus was about what absorbs into the body, because we always think essential oils put it on the skin, it absorbs in the bloodstream, and that's how it works. That is not the most profound way that essential oils work. The most activity you're getting is through these receptors topically on your skin. So this is the diagram I said that I would show you. And you can see in the surface is the epidermal layer where you're seeing the keratinocytes. And you have TRPV1, which is one of the ones that I talked about, and the CB1 and CB2. These are at the surface of the skin. They don't have to penetrate very deep to create a response in the skin. And then you can see over to the left side there, it's sensory neurons, and you also see the TRPV1. And if you go down to TRPM8, that is actually a receptor that, when you get that cool feeling from menthol, the menthol compound, or peppermint is probably a more familiar way of saying that. When you're using peppermint, it's the menthol compound in the peppermint that binds with that TRPVM8 receptor, which is a sensory nerve, and it responds to cold. And so it will trigger a response that would be similar to going out into the cold. This is why we get that little chilly effect whenever we use the peppermint on our skin. Some of the other receptors, you can see that they're also in the immune cells, which is all, I have to the lower left, the dermal immune cells. but then also in the epidermal layer, in the keratinocytes. The Langerhans cells also have the TRPV1, TRPV2. So these are all receptors that, when you're using essential oils, these receptors, their compounds are binding to these receptors, triggering activity. Now, one of the reasons that I'm talking about this in terms of know the history is that part of your mission, and this takes some understanding, it takes some education. The more you know about the oils, the more you know about the compounds in the oils, the more you know about the complexity of the oils, and the more you know about these receptors, the more fine-tuned your skincare applications are going to be, including centered around a person's history. Because the history, and how I was describing that as having neurological effects, it's creating effects that these receptors are also, in a way, responding to. And what we're looking at for these receptors is binding with these receptors, creating a physiological response, are the ways that will counteract the negative response through stress, trauma, and injury, and the other things that I've mentioned so far. So here is working with essential oils. I wasn't going to put it. Don't you love it when I do that? I'll give you a whole talk and then I don't mention what oils, how to do it, or anything like that. So I'm going to give you just a brief overview on how you would do this working with essential oils. So what we've done is we've accumulated the way to do an evaluation in a way. I still want to talk more about that. And when we know how trauma, how injury, how environment, how diet can affect the skin, we are more able to select the oils that will best holistically address the conditions that we've determined are the factors that we need to address. So in this example, we're looking at emotional and physical trauma, which is, two different things, but the body can respond in a similar way. Actually, physical trauma can create emotional trauma as well. So we know how all that works. Now, the oils that I have here, helichrysum, frankincense, and rose, just a very simple formula or very simple, combination of 3 different oils. This is extremely holistic, especially when you consider that rose is such a complex oil. By itself, it'll do what I'm talking about here. Now, topically, this blend will reduce inflammation, helichrysum being a powerful anti-inflammatory, as well as frankincense and then rose also having good anti-inflammatory properties. Repairing tissue. So when I talked about that olfactory nerve ending in the skin, when the rose, and I'm not sure if they're compounds, it's likely there's compounds in helichrysum and frankincense that are also binding with that olfactory nerve endings, the triggering that's going to happen. So the information that is shared through that receptor using these oils, it's going to be cellular regeneration. So it's going to help repair damaged skin. It's going to help close wounds. It's going to help break down scar tissue. So this is one of the ways that you want to look at that. This topical application, physically, inflammation, repairing tissue. Now, when you put this on your skin, one of the cool things about facial care is you can't get much closer to the nose. And so you might as well make the nose have a little bit of function as well, not just surface, right? And so holistically, what these oils will do, calm fear. Rose is very good for calming fear. And also emotional recovery. So frankincense and rose, not so much helichrysum, but it does have some good emotional regulating responses when you're using helichrysum, but mainly it's going to be frankincense and the rose, especially rose. We know rose is good for the heart, good for soothing the emotions, good for love, good for, a nice warm hug, right? And all of these things contribute to balancing emotional trauma, even physical trauma, right? Because again, physical trauma creates emotional trauma. So you need to alleviate these conditions. And this blend, being holistic, it's, topically has the physical properties. And then through the olfactory system, we're going to help balance emotional issues. Okay. How about another one? Yeah. Let's do another one. All right. So here we have for urban defense and reset. What do I mean by urban defense? It really depends. If you live in the city, I lived in New York, grew up in Boston area, but, spent most of my time in Boston. And, those are rather condensed cities. There's a certain urban environment. Now, people from, very rural areas or, suburban areas that have, a lot of space, they can feel, just like the congestion of the city, they can feel emotionally congested. They can feel a little constricted. They can feel like there's just too much information overload. So a little bit of what I'm talking about when I say urban defense, but I'm also talking environment. There tends to be a little more, pollution, toxicity in the atmosphere when you're in an urban environment. And so you want to do a reset, right? So if you grew up in this kind of environment and it had a negative impact on you, usually if you grow up in an urban environment, it's, it's what you know. And so you're generally not going to have too much negative responses to it. Unless, of course, your history includes that, right? Now, lavender, geranium, and myrrh. The reason that I chose these for that function is topically really good antioxidants. All three of these oils have good antioxidant properties. And actually, the other blend has really good antioxidant properties too. So I probably should have included that. Now, the barrier repair, and this is stimulated through the receptors. When we talk about, the barrier repair, because we're talking about the lipid barrier is, the ceramides and the free fatty acids and all the other things that are in the keratinocytes. They're actually in between that brick and mortar kind of structure that is the epidermis at the surface level. And the barrier can be compromised through stress. And so partly what we're talking about here, and these are good, lavender and geranium and actually myrrh as well, good for reducing stress. And so that actually gets into the scent because you're stabilizing nervous system, right? The nervous function. And the nervous system can compromise the lipid barrier. And so this is where that holistic function is melding together to create a very holistic formula here that topically antioxidant. There's also a lot of physical, there is some regenerative properties going on here, anti-inflammatory, all the other things. You can't just list a couple of things whenever you do these blends. And this is the I don't know category. When I talk about I don't know, if I just list these three oils and you're not really familiar with them and all their properties, you're dealing with an I don't know. You're taking my words, and that's how you're going to apply this according to what I just said. But there's a lot going on in there. There's a lot of what you don't know. There's a lot of what I don't know in these oils. And when we're talking about receptors and we're talking complexity of the oils, whatever we're using it for, the oils, they don't care what we're doing it for. The oils are going to do what the oils do. So all those compounds are going to bind with receptors. They're going to trigger a lot of certain activity. They're going to create overall balance to the emotions and to the whole physical system. So this is the beauty of working with essential oils. They're going to do things that, I don't know what it was doing. I mentioned the outside, inside out method. I'm just going to give you a little bit more information about what that is and, how I've structured it. Like I said earlier, beauty inside out just wasn't complete enough for me. I always want to look at what's outside. So we're looking at things like relationships. What is the person's, their relationships with their family? If they have a partner, what's the relationship with their partner? With their coworkers, what are their relationships like? This is something that's really important. Now, the way I always will explain this is people in the same situation. So same work environment, same boss. the boss is very irritating and hard to deal with. Now, one person's all chill, no effect. Emotionally, physically, they just deal. They go for the ride and they do as best they can, working around with the complications of working with a difficult boss. Now, another person, every time the boss could walk by, this person will freak out. They go into fight or flight. So they're releasing cortisol. They're releasing all the neurotransmitters that are damaging to the skin. And if you're dealing, if you're talking about somebody's work environment, you want to know how they are internalizing information. And so it's not, the important thing is your boss, kind of a jerk? That's not really what you're asking. What you're asking is what is your response to your coworkers? What is your response to your boss? How do you take that information in and what do you do with it, right? One person is chill, the other person gets all stressed out. So this is what outside, inside out means. Like I talked about, the quality of the food. It's not just that you're eating, a green food diet, or the multicolor rainbow diet, which is really good for you. What's the quality of those foods? Are they organic? Are they layered with pesticide, which are endocrine disruptors, which are not good for the skin? So what is happening outside is very, very important here. And this is what the outside, inside out method is about. It's about looking at what this person has in their external environment and how they are internalizing that information. That's what's key here. Now, you're looking for those external influences, and you're trying to determine how they're internalized. Again, if you're not a psychologist, this isn't your job, but that doesn't mean you have to ignore it. What it means is you're looking at it in a different way. You're looking at it as a skin therapist. You're looking at it as an aromatherapist when you're working with essential oils. Now, like I say here, you may not always find the source, but here's that I don't know thing again. Even what you don't know, you can address, because you do want to address unknowns. And essential oils allow you to do that because they're complex. They're that complex mixture of compounds that they have. So you're choosing oils based on your knowledge. And here's a key: intuition. Your intuition is a very important feature to how you are going to choose oils. Now, what is your intuition? It's you pulling information from your knowledge base. Your history of knowledge is where your intuitive methods come from. So again, the more you know, the more you study, the more you learn about essential oils, the more your intuitive processes will kick in and provide some really good ingredients for you, or really good essential oil choices. So what you're doing here is you're listening, you're not diagnosing, right? You again, if you are a psychologist, you do your work, and listening is a key piece of your psychotherapy, right? Listening is important. And as a therapist, you could spend hours doing intake and consultation. But what you really want to do is you want to have a conversation. You want the person to give you the information without even asking for it. And so during conversation, you're always looking for the keys. You're always looking for what is it that this person is responding to that's causing this issue in their skin. This is what you're trying to find. And it isn't always in an intake form. It isn't always in the questions you have listed that you're asking the person. It comes from casual conversation, which is really good because in casual conversation, generally, this is when your guests are more relaxed. They're more likely to share really good information that you can use in that casual conversation. Now, as a last step here, I want to talk about ritual. And in the way I'm talking about here, ritual is repetition to repair. Okay. And the way that process works, when you're applying your skincare, some people do give you techniques. There's some really cool techniques out there. So the Ayurvedic companies are now using Ayurvedic techniques to apply your skincare, the application, yes, it can change the activity of what you're applying. But in what I'm talking about here, that application, that ritual, that habit becomes an intention. It becomes a thought. And when that intention and that thought are part of the skincare application, it also triggers positive neurotransmitters that are going to help the healing process. Intention is a very big deal. And in a lot of my therapeutic work, I have a sleep system. I have stress systems. I have all of these different systems, and they all use a certain ritual that I like to express. And this uses the science of scent. The way it works is whatever your ritual is, doesn't matter. Now, what I like to do is it's always best if the person is exposed to the scent of that skincare or of the essential oil blend for the first time when they're doing this ritual. The best way to explain this is through meditation. So you have a morning meditation. You get up, you sit, you meditate, you have your space, you get into that meditative state. And while you're relaxing, you take out the blend, or you just have the blend right there on a tissue or whatever, even if it's skincare, put it a little bit on a tissue, leave it by your space. So you're smelling it. What you're doing is in that meditative space, that relaxed state, you're creating a scent memory bond with that scent. And intention or a mantra is also good. My skin is healthy, it's vital, it's perfect, whatever your mantra is in the meditation with that scent, creating a scent memory bond with that intention. So when you are then applying your skincare, you have whatever your ritual is. If you have one, I sort of do, but I don't. But the intention I do have, I make my own skincare. I have this serum that's I think it's amazing. It's perfect skin. And whenever I'm applying perfect skin, I know what I put in there. I know what my intention was. So even without having a mantra, even without having a very specific intention, my intention applying my serum every morning and every night is a ritual with an intention that's saying that, boy, Jim, you got really good skin. It's a good intention, right? I mean, the essential oils and all the plant-based skincare that's in there is really good for your skin. Now, repetition also encodes the safety of the nervous system, right? So the meditation, the ritual, whatever it is that puts you in a positive space, okay? And then what you're doing is you're combining intention. Breath is also important. If you tend to be in fight or flight a lot, there are certain practices, breathing practices that will raise parasympathetic activity, okay? So breath is important. Touch, even if it's you doing the touching every morning, this is also key to the healing process. As a therapist, touch is also important. You do understand that, I'm sure. And then the scent, the emotional memory scent bond that you're creating. So these things holistically go together to help resolve any of that negative history, to also help resolve the physical condition of the skin. So skincare becomes an intentional healing habit. Okay, now what I've just done is I've explained some of the ways that I work. And if you have retreats, if you have a spa, resort, I come out there and I will do workshops for your guests based on these. I have a lot of really fun workshops. And, I do storytelling. Storytelling is part of everything, right? Everything I just did was storytelling, this whole presentation. But I'll do staff training, education in essential oils especially, but also plant-based ingredients. I am a visiting expert, and I love to come out and do retreats. I just love to hang out and have a daily process for doing things like the ritual, where we actually really cement the practices that I've talked about here. And this also works really well for corporate. There's a lot of stress in the corporate environment. And you can relieve that stress through your skincare. That's what I love about skincare. Skincare is so therapeutic on so many different levels. So, yeah, that's, bring me out. And also, if you're on YouTube, please subscribe and press the buttons and all those things. On LinkedIn, please share and, comment. I haven't opened up my comments yet, so let me do that. See if any of you guys are talking to me. I didn't really announce this one very loudly, so I don't know. I'm not sure who's out there. But hi, if you are out there, and if you're on the recording, that's all good too. But yes, anyway, I am really thankful that you guys have joined me here, and I'm always, 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 always interested in your input and what you have to say. So please communicate with me. I gave you that email address, and if you need to do it again, well, I just gave it to you there, right there. So that email address, I gave you a different one, info, but anything jimharrison.com, I get them all. And go to my website. I have some pretty interesting things, blogs and stories and things like that on my website for you to check out. But I'm very thankful that you guys have joined me. If you have any questions, again, contact me, DM me if you're on LinkedIn. And I will see you in my next presentation. I thank you so much for joining me.